Less than 10 miles connect us. The gift of interdependence. It comes obviously right out of our current seventh principle, which says respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we're a part. In fact, that first value statement that we read responsively is pretty much a quote right from that. So this interdependence, every time I've heard this seventh principle over the years, it immediately thinks of Earth Day. In fact, it's no coincidence that we have interdependence as our theme this month with Earth Day. And it's all about the story that I just read with how much of nature and insects and water buffalo and beetles and tigers are interdependent. But this month, I'm going to do it in two parts since I do 2 sermons a month. I think there's a little bit more complexity to this, and the story I just read brought it out, that all the creatures were interdependent with each other, and then of course they're interdependent on rain and the earth. So today I'm going to talk about a subset of interdependence that's the interdependence of humanity, specifically our congregations. And if you remember the examples at the very end of the responsive reading, the first one was, we will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. There's nothing in there about nature or earth. It's more universal. And sometimes I think that because humans don't seem to acknowledge the interdependence amongst ourselves is one of the reasons we have trouble understanding the interdependence with us and the planet. So this whole theme and my idea of interdependence versus interconnectedness came about this month in a kind of an unusual way. Now, the two terms obviously overlap. Interconnectedness, to me, is much more transactional. It's sort of things that are near each other, things that interact, and they're not separate, but they don't necessarily have that dependency with each other. Interdependent, rather, means they rely on each other in a much deeper way, a much deeper connection, and they exist probably to help and make sure that each other thrives, or even exists or survives. So a lot of this came about because I'm in a chalice circle like many of you, and this month's packet you have to pick out a spiritual exercise. And I picked out a spiritual exercise that just really caught my eye. Sometimes I go through all of them and I'm like, nothing's really crazy, or I want them all. This one, I had one that really spoke to me. To summarize what it is, you're supposed to focus on something in the natural world with which you already have a connection and make it deeper. So the idea, what they were suggesting, is that you go sit with this or be with this natural element every day for a week or multiple times over a month, at different times a day, different angles, that kind of thing, so that you are strengthening your connection with this something that you already know about. And I guess the idea is that it will help you enter into more of a spiritual interdependence with it. It doesn't come out and say it, and in the exercise, this is one of those examples where it seemed like it was just making a stronger connection. But because it's a spiritual exercise, I think that's where it's taking me. So I picked the Fox River because I happen to live in a neighborhood that's on a bluff that overlooks the Fox River in Appleton, and there's parks next to the river all around me. I cross bridges constantly every day that are over the Fox River, both in Appleton and up in Green Bay, so it seemed like a natural thing. I've known it for 30 years, but I've never really paid much attention to it. So I started that. But before I started sitting next to the river, I decided, well, I'm not from Appleton. I'm not from Wisconsin even, so I don't really know much about this river that I'm going to study. So fortunately, there's Wikipedia, and somebody put out quite a thoughtful, well-researched article on it, the history of the Fox River. But up in the very first paragraph, there was another link that really caught my eye. It said Portage Canal. And any of you know about the Portage Canal? Okay, Jeff does, but you know everything, so you don't count. Because I thought, what is that? So I clicked on it, and I was just really taken in by this. So the Fox River empties into the Bay of Green Bay, up in Green Bay, and it's 200 miles long. And the source of it is in a town with this peculiar name called Pardeeville, but it's Pardeeville. A lot of you are nodding like you know where this place is. I thought, well, that's kind of interesting in and of itself. Pardeeville is less than 10 miles away from Portage, Wisconsin. Okay, and so somebody around 1837, to be precise, had the idea that to help commerce flow from the St. Lawrence Seaway through the Great Lakes, up the Fox River, and then down the Wisconsin River to probably New Orleans, that they needed a canal. And it was only 10 miles, so why couldn't you do that? So in 1837, they started building this canal. Well, it goes through a wetland. Okay, that's a problem. So you had to cart out tons and tons of mud by hand for 2.5 miles. Needless to say, they kind of gave up on it rather quickly. But in 1849, somebody was industrious and created a canal big enough you could paddle a canoe down it. So the rivers were connected, and the Wisconsin River is actually at a higher elevation, so any water is going to flow from the Wisconsin River into the headwaters of the Fox River. So that wasn't much, and then we had the Civil War and all that kind of stuff. And in 1876, the Army Corps of Engineers actually built a canal, a functioning canal, and you know, they had big ideas for it, but that was at the same time the railroad was becoming a lot stronger, and then eventually highways and automobiles. So from a commerce perspective, this canal really didn't amount to much, but it existed for 50 years, till 1926, until a lot of the wood on it started rotting out. And so they came back and they rebuilt it in cement and steel to make sure that it would stay. And then it lasted till 1951. And they finally decided that it wasn't needed, and they welded it shut. Then, and this was another surprise, in 2020 and 2021, some group got the idea to clean it up. It had a lot of toxic waste in it from the bit of commercial traffic it did have. So they made it whole again, so it wasn't going to poison anybody. And they decided to try to get it to reopen, to use it as part of the Ice Age Trail. Now, you had somebody present about the Ice Age Trail a couple months ago, so I thought, oh my God, synchronicity, here we go again, that somebody's trying to create this industrial slough into something that would be very recreational. And so I became fascinated with the idea that some water from the Wisconsin River downstream of Stevens Point would feed the headwaters of the Fox River. So that got me going into my metaphor land. I took a little side trip for a second there, though. I realized that our 3 fellowships are all kind of connected by these bodies of waters in sort of a strange way. Not so strange if you think about it. So each of the fellowships are located within blocks of rivers whose watersheds are connected by this short canal. So the fellowship in Stevens Point, where they're leasing space right now, is across the street from a park that's along the banks of the Wisconsin River. So that's a pretty obvious one where that water goes. Then the Fox River starts at Pardeeville and comes on this way. Originally, I was thinking that the Fox River came through Fond du Lac, and I realized, no, that's the Fond du Lac River. It empties out, the Fox River, empties out near Oshkosh and Lake Butamore, and then eventually Lake Winnebago. Well, Fond du Lac sits at the south end of Lake Winnebago. And there's a river that feeds it from down here called the Fond du Lac River, of which where I'm standing right now is only, 3-4 blocks away from the Fond du Lac River that flows into Lake Winnebago. So all of this comes out of Lake Winnebago. The Fox River starts up again, goes through Neenah, goes through Appleton where I live. I get to wave at it when it goes by, Kaukauna, and then up into Green Bay. And right before it empties into the Bay of the Green Bay, it meets up with the East River. Guess what? The fellowship in Green Bay sits across the street from a little park that's on the banks of the East River. And so it's just oddly how we're all interconnected in this way. And so I thought there's got to be a metaphor here for this interconnectedness leading to interdependence. So I started thinking about the development of all 3 of you, my relationship with you, and how that's turned from connectedness into interdependence over the years. So those of you that are kind of new to this, or maybe don't even know the whole story, I'm going to try to summarize real quickly about these three congregations. So there's many ways we're connected. First of all, the obvious, we're islands of liberal Unitarian Universalists living in Northeast Wisconsin with similar histories, or in the case of Stevens Point, on the edge of Northeast Wisconsin. We were founded as, and still are, lay-led congregations. Stevens Point was in the late 1960s, Green Bay in the mid-1990s, and Open Circle in the early 2000s. Each has had periods of flourishing and declines along the way, and the zeitgeist, I'll call it, there's a strong affinity towards humanism, environmentalism, nature-based spirituality, and community-based social justice and democracy initiatives. Most of the members were raised in some sort of religious tradition, most often Roman Catholic and a lot of mainstream Protestants, but rejected it for many, many reasons. But ultimately, it seems to be coming down to theology. They just didn't agree with the theology anymore. And then this is interesting. At each point, each congregation has refurbished an old building and taken very great pride in it. Unfortunately, Stevens Point no longer is in that building, and that's why they're leasing. But I thought, well, that's a commonality. And then each has experimented having professionally trained religious leaders in one way, shape, or form. So in the mid-2000s is where I kind of entered the scene and the connection between everybody. I was a lay minister at the congregation in Appleton. There was a handful of us that were trained to do weddings and funerals and thought, well, why don't I take a hand at this preaching thing and see what I think about it, see if that might be a career I want to do after I retire. So the Point Fellowship actually was the very first place I ever did a sermon, and they became more formally part of my internship in 2014 and 2016 because my internship was in Wausau. So one Sunday I would preach up in Wausau, and the next Sunday I'd be down in Stevens Point. Then I became a monthly speaker, first Sunday of the month, with the Green Bay Fellowship the year they were gathering at the Mothy Center at UW Green Bay while they were waiting for their new drive-through bank building to be refurbished to be the fellowship that they have now. And the drive-through is really handy in inclement weather, I gotta say. And then I was asked to become Open Circle's quarter-time minister, I think it was in 2017, which became half-time the next year. So all of this was this connection. We were interconnected, but basically because of me, right? And then the pandemic hit, and everything kind of changed. All three congregations came together out of necessity during the height of the pandemic in 2020. I was doing it out of my home office in my apartment at the time. And by 2021, the consortium was created in the current breakout of my contract, 25% each for Point and Green Bay and 50% for Open Circle. So more than anything, our shared resources over the last 4 years have continued to strengthen, and there's many more interdependent ties than there were originally. One of the things I've noticed is that somebody besides me is beginning to visit the other congregations. There is a much closer relationship with Open Circle and Stevens Point because Stevens Point has shrunk so far that they weren't capable of their own governing board, and so Open Circle took over governing board and their finances, and I know a lot of the leaders have gone over to Point to visit them from time to time for meetings. But a couple weeks ago, there was a whole contingent from Green Bay that showed up Monday night in Stevens Point, and I just thought that warmed my heart that here we are traveling all these miles to see each other. So we have a shared minister, that's the obvious. We have shared programming. We're all doing the Soul Matters curriculum, which is part of the children's religious exploration, it's part of chalice circles, it's part of Sunday morning, and we're even using it now for the teen programming. There's shared finances, shared spiritual journeys, a shared mission, and frankly, a shared future. So I go back to the value statements that we read. The example at the end. Again, we will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality, and justice. I think the consortium is an example of us trying to do that. And then because of our interdependence, we're stronger in a better position to live out our UU values in the community. So we have this vision that we honor the interdependent web of all existence, and with reverence for the great web of life and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it, and then we covenant together to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation. And we can do that when we're stronger together. So where does this river metaphor ultimately lead me? I basically want you to take away three things, three themes. First, our fellowships, I think frankly, have built a canal called the consortium, which not only connects us, but strengthens us through interdependence. Second, let's not forget that rivers flow naturally where they need to go. Rivers are always open to new possibilities where this natural flow takes them next. They don't resist. They just might find obstacles in their path, and they always find a way around it, which I think is a real analogy with how we've created a consortium and where we're going to move in the future. And then third, it seems fitting to me that the Portage Canal, once a polluted, welded shut wasteland, has been cleaned up to become part of the Ice Age Trail, a tribute to the majesty and longevity of the Earth, particularly the Glacier Age. So something is telling me that the interdependence of our consortium canal, may lead to something significant and fitting to continue to create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice, and to repair harm and damaged relationships. So let's give thanks for this consortium canal we have built and the gift of interdependence. May our future together be blessed. Amen. Let's take a minute to think about it while we get set up for the next hymn.